Now, we'll look at the lubrication system. The engine of the D4A series has a lubrication system which lubricates each part of the engine by making oil run off through an oil cooler and oil filter by a gear-typed oil pump. The gear-typed oil pump is operated by a skew gear installed in a camshaft. The oil pump case has a hole for oil flow, and then the oil flowing out from it lubricates a skew gear in the camshaft and an oil pump gear. The engine oil transmitted by the oil pump is supplied to the oil cooler. A relief valve in the oil pump prevents the lubricating system from excessive high pressure by leaking some of the engine oil to the oil fan. The oil cooler is a device for heat exchange between the oil supplied from the oil pump and the coolant. It has a bypass valve which can be opened when the oil filter is clogged. Particularly in case that the oil viscosity is high at low temperature, the bypass valve will be opened in high resistance against the oil passage according as how much the oil cooler element is loaded, in order to make the engine oil flow directly to the oil filter without going through the oil cooler. In case the engine oil pressure is in less than normal range, the built-in oil pressure switch will be closed, and then it will let a driver know about the abnormal oil pressure by lighting a warning sign of oil pressure on the dashboard. A paper-type spin-on element in one united body of a full flow filter and a bypass filter together are used for an oil filter. The engine oil, which flows into the main passage of a crankcase from the oil filter, lubricates all parts of the engine before going back to the oil pan. First, the main bearing and connecting rod bearing. The oil main passage has an oil passage to lubricate each main bearing. The oil flowing through the oil hole lubricates the main bearing and connecting rod bearing through the oil hole in the crankshaft. Also, it lubricates the small end part bush of the connecting rod through the oil hole of the connecting rod, and then it cools the piston by being sprinkled from the oil jet. Second, the camshaft. The oil flowing through the oil passage from the oil main passage lubricates each camshaft bush. It also lubricates the camshaft gear and valves through the oil hole as an oil passage at the journal of the front engine. Third, valves. The engine oil flows into the cylinder head through the oil hole and the pipe at the upper part of the crankcase after lubricating the number 1 camshaft bush. The engine oil lubricates each rocker bush, flowing in the rocker shaft through the front rocker shaft bracket, while it lubricates the slippery surface of the valve cap at the rocker and valve stem with being sprinkled into the oil hole at the upper part of the rocker. Also, it lubricates the tappet and the cam of the camshaft for flowing back to the oil pan through the cylinder head and the push rod hole in the crankcase. The gear bush in the timing gear idler is lubricated by some of the oil from the oil main passage and the oil sprinkled into the oil hole of the idler gear. Also, the oil lubricates the timing gear through the forced lubricating system with an automatic timer, or the oil pipe mounted at the idler shaft. The engine oil lubricates the injection pump and the governor and drops to the oil pan from the oil passage of the bearing cover. Flowing into the vacuum pump through the oil passage of the timing gear case from the oil main passage, the engine oil lubricates the vane parts, and then it flows back to the oil pan, flowing into the timing gear case with air from the air nozzle of the vacuum pump. The bearing is lubricated by engine oil. It takes 2 to 3 minutes to circulate the engine oil when starting the engine. So beware that the excessive increase in RPM may cause serious damage to the turbocharger. In order to lubricate and cool the turbocharger enough against its high-speed revolution, also make sure that the ignition should be off after idling for 2 to 3 minutes.